Sometimes the most ordinary people become heroes in moments when everything else falls apart. For Marcus Chen, a single father working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on, heroism was the furthest thing from his mind that October evening. He was simply driving home from his night shift at the warehouse, exhausted and worried about his daughter's upcoming school fees, when he saw the flames dancing against the Seattle skyline. The mansion was burning like a beacon in the exclusive Magnolia district, and trapped inside was Victoria Ashford, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune worth $500 million. She had been searching for Marcus Chen for 15 years, following clues that led nowhere, and hiring private investigators who came up empty. Neither of them knew that fate was about to bring them together in the most dangerous way possible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But why had Victoria been searching for a struggling warehouse worker? And what connection could a billionaire heiress possibly have to a man who counted every dollar just to survive? The emergency sirens wailed through the crisp October night as Marcus Chen pulled his 15-year-old Honda Civic to the curb outside the burning Ashford estate. He should have kept driving. Any rational person would have continued home to his small apartment where his 12-year-old daughter Emma was probably asleep, trusting that her father would return safely from another long day of work. But Marcus had never been able to ignore someone in trouble, a trait that had cost him plenty over the years but had also defined who he was at his core. At 38, Marcus carried the weight of responsibility like a physical burden across his shoulders. His black hair showed premature streaks of gray at the temples, evidence of the stress that came with raising a daughter alone while working as a warehouse loader during the day, a delivery driver in the evenings, and a weekend janitor at a local office building. The mathematical precision required to stretch every paycheck to make sure Emma had what she needed for school while keeping their small apartment had become second nature to him. He knew exactly how many hours he needed to work each week to cover rent, groceries, utilities, and the small savings account he maintained for Emma's future education. The Ashford mansion blazed against the night sky like something from a nightmare, its flames reflecting off the waters of Puget Sound in the distance. The 3-story Victorian structure, with its ornate gables and wraparound porches, represented the kind of wealth that existed in a completely different universe from Marcus's daily struggles. He had driven through this neighborhood before during his delivery routes, always struck by the contrast between these palatial homes and the cramped apartment complex where he and Emma lived. Fire trucks were already on scene, their red lights casting dancing shadows across the manicured lawns and expensive cars of the neighboring estates. Marcus could see firefighters setting up their equipment, but something about their positioning suggested they were preparing for a defensive operation rather than an aggressive interior attack. The mansion's age and the intensity of the flames had apparently convinced them that the structure was too dangerous to enter. That's when Marcus heard it. Above the roar of the fire and the shouting of the emergency responders, a voice was calling for help from somewhere inside the burning building. It was faint, almost lost in the chaos, but unmistakably human and desperately afraid. Marcus looked around, expecting to see firefighters preparing to respond, but they seemed focused on preventing the fire from spreading to adjacent structures. He approached the fire captain, a stern-faced woman in her 50s who was coordinating the response with the efficiency of someone who had seen too many tragedies. "Excuse me," Marcus said, raising his voice to be heard over the noise. "I think there's someone still inside. I can hear them calling for help." Captain Rodriguez turned to him with the expression of someone accustomed to well-meaning civilians who thought they understood emergency situations better than trained professionals. "Sir, you need to stay back. We've evacuated everyone who was reported to be in the building. The structure is too unstable for interior operations." But Marcus could still hear the voice, fainter now but persistent. He strained to listen, trying to determine where it was coming from. The sound seemed to be originating from the east wing of the mansion, where flames were less intense but smoke was pouring from broken windows. "There's definitely someone in there," he insisted. "The voice is coming from that side of the building." Captain Rodriguez followed his gaze toward the east wing, her professional assessment clearly indicating that even that section would be extremely dangerous to enter. The fire had been burning for at least 20 minutes, filling the interior with toxic smoke and undermining the structural integrity of the century-old building. "Sir, I understand your concern, but we cannot risk firefighter lives on unconfirmed reports. Our thermal imaging shows no heat signatures consistent with human presence. Marcus felt the familiar surge of frustration that came with being dismissed by authority figures, a feeling that had become common in his interactions with school administrators, social workers, and employers, who seemed to view him as just another struggling single parent whose opinions didn't carry much weight. But this wasn't about his pride or his tendency to advocate for underdogs. Someone was trapped inside that burning building, and the people trained to help them had decided the risk was too great. The voice called out again, weak but audible to Marcus's trained ear. Years of working in noisy warehouse environments had taught him to filter out background sounds and focus on specific auditory details. He was certain that someone was alive inside that east wing, probably overcome by smoke and unable to move towards safety on their own. Without announcing his intention or giving himself time to reconsider, Marcus slipped away from the group of emergency responders and approached the mansion from the side yard. The heat from the fire was intense, even at a distance, and smoke stung his eyes as he moved closer to the building. He pulled his work shirt up over his nose and mouth, knowing it would provide minimal protection against the toxic fumes, but hoping it might help him breathe long enough to locate whoever was trapped inside. The East Wing's ground floor windows had been broken, either by the heat or by firefighters attempting to ventilate the structure. Marcus approached the largest opening, peering into an interior that was dark except for the orange glow of flames visible through doorways leading to other parts of the house. The smoke was thick but not impenetrable, and he could see what appeared to be a living room or study with furniture still largely intact. He called out, "Hello, can you hear me? Where are you?" and listened carefully for a response. The voice that answered was definitely female, though weakened by smoke inhalation and fear. "Help me," came the reply from somewhere deeper in the building. "I'm upstairs. I can't get down." Marcus had no training in fire rescue, no protective equipment, and no authority to be attempting what he was about to do. What he did have was 15 years of experience as a single parent, which had taught him that sometimes you had to take calculated risks to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Emma had been trapped in situations before, not as dramatic as this one, but circumstances where Marcus had to make quick decisions about her safety without having complete information or official permission. He climbed through the broken window, immediately feeling the oppressive heat and toxic air of the burning building's interior. The smoke was worse than he had anticipated, making it difficult to see more than a few feet in any. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Direction. He stayed low, remembering something he had heard about smoke rising and cleaner air being closer to the floor, though he wasn't sure if that was actually true or just something he had seen in movies. The interior of the mansion was even more opulent than he had expected, with hardwood floors, Persian rugs, and furniture that probably cost more than Marcus earned in a year. But the luxury was being rapidly consumed by flames that were spreading from the main part of the house toward the wing he had entered. He could see that he had limited time before this section of the building became completely untenable. "Keep calling to me," Marcus shouted toward the ceiling. "I'm coming to find you, but I need to follow your voice." The response came from directly above him, confirming that the trapped person was on the second floor of the east wing. Marcus located the staircase, a grand curved structure that under normal circumstances would have been beautiful, but now looked like a potential death trap. The wooden steps appeared solid, but smoke was pouring down from the upper level, and he could hear the ominous sounds of the fire spreading closer. As he began climbing the stairs, Marcus thought about Emma sleeping safely in their apartment, trusting that her father would return home as he always did. If something happened to him tonight, she would become another statistic in the foster care system, her life permanently altered by his decision to help a stranger. The thought almost made him turn back, but the voice from upstairs called out again, weaker now, and clearly indicating that whoever was trapped was losing consciousness. The second-floor hallway was a corridor of smoke and confusion, with multiple doorways leading to rooms that Marcus couldn't see into clearly. He called out again and followed the response to a bedroom at the far end of the hall. The door was closed, and when Marcus opened it, he was struck by the sight of a woman in her early 30s lying on the floor near a window, apparently having collapsed while trying to escape through an opening that was too high and too small to be practical. She was conscious but clearly suffering from smoke inhalation, her breathing labored, and her movements weak. Despite the circumstances, Marcus could see that she was elegantly dressed in clothes that probably cost more than his monthly rent, with jewelry that suggested significant wealth. Her auburn hair was disheveled from her escape attempts, and soot streaked her face, but there was something familiar about her features that Marcus couldn't place. "I'm here to help," Marcus said, kneeling beside her and assessing her condition. "Can you walk if I support you?" She looked at him with eyes that seemed to be trying to focus, despite the smoke and fear. "I think so," she managed to say, though her voice was hoarse from inhaling toxic fumes. "The stairs? Are they still safe?" Marcus helped her to her feet, noting that she was taller than he had expected, and that despite her obvious distress, she moved with a grace that spoke of good health and physical fitness. "We'll find out together," he said, supporting her weight as they moved toward the bedroom door. "What's your name?" "Victoria," she replied, leaning heavily on his shoulder as they entered the smoke-filled hallway. "Victoria Ashford. This is my house." The name meant nothing to Marcus, though he registered that she was apparently the homeowner rather than a visitor or employee who had been trapped by the fire. They moved slowly down the hallway, Marcus guiding them both by memory and by feeling along the walls when the smoke became too thick to see clearly. The return trip down the curved staircase was treacherous, with visibility reduced to almost nothing, and the sound of the fire growing louder as it continued to spread through the mansion. Victoria was able to walk, but needed constant support, and Marcus found himself making decisions about their route based on instinct and the limited information his senses could provide. When they finally reached the ground floor, Marcus could see that the window he had entered through was still accessible, though flames were now visible in the adjacent room. The heat had increased significantly during the time they had been upstairs, and he realized that they had probably been minutes away from being trapped themselves. He helped Victoria through the window opening, then followed her into the blessed coolness of the October night air. They had barely cleared the building when Captain Rodriguez and two paramedics rushed toward them, the fire captain's expression indicating that she was simultaneously relieved and furious about Marcus's unauthorized rescue attempt. "Sir, what you just did was incredibly dangerous and completely against protocol," Captain Rodriguez said as the paramedics began examining Victoria. "You could have been killed, and you could have compromised our entire operation." Marcus was too exhausted and emotionally drained to argue. He simply nodded, accepting the criticism while watching the paramedics work with Victoria. She was receiving oxygen and seemed to be responding well to treatment, though she would clearly need to be transported to a hospital for evaluation and care. As the paramedics prepared to move Victoria to their ambulance, she looked directly at Marcus with an intensity that seemed unusual given their brief encounter. "Wait," she said, pulling the oxygen mask away from her face. "I need to know your name." "Marcus Chen," he replied, not thinking much of the request. People who had been through traumatic experiences together often felt a temporary bond that seemed more significant than it actually was. But Victoria's reaction to his name was immediate and dramatic. Her eyes widened, and she struggled to sit up despite the paramedics' attempts to keep her lying down. "Marcus Chen," she repeated, staring at him as if she had seen something impossible. "Marcus Chen from Seattle?" Before Marcus could respond to what seemed like an odd question, the paramedics insisted on transporting Victoria to the hospital, and Captain Rodriguez was demanding his contact information for the incident report and potential charges related to his unauthorized entry into the burning building. The chaos of the emergency response separated them before Marcus could understand why Victoria had reacted so strongly to learning his identity. As Marcus drove home through the empty Seattle streets, he replayed the evening's events in his mind, trying to make sense of what had happened. He had acted on instinct to help someone in danger, successfully completing a rescue that had required considerable personal risk. But Victoria's reaction to his name suggested that their encounter was more than just a random act of heroism. When he arrived at his apartment building, Marcus sat in his car for several minutes before going inside. Emma would wake up in a few hours, and he would need to get her ready for school before beginning another day of work at the warehouse. His life would return to its normal pattern of carefully managed financial struggle and parental responsibility, but something about the evening felt like it had changed everything in ways he didn't yet understand. The smell of smoke clung to his clothes and hair, physical evidence of his journey into the burning mansion. But more persistent than the sensory reminders was the memory of Victoria's expression when she heard his name. She had looked at him not like a grateful victim looking at her rescuer, but like someone who had been searching for something important and had finally found it. Marcus checked on Emma, who was sleeping peacefully in her small bedroom, surrounded by the school books and art projects that represented her hopes for a future different from the financial constraints that defined their current life. She stirred slightly as he looked in on her, but didn't wake. Tomorrow he would tell her about the fire and the rescue, though he would probably minimize the danger he had faced to avoid worrying her. As he prepared for a few hours of sleep before his next shift, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his encounter with Victoria Ashford was the beginning of something significant, rather than the end of an isolated incident. The way she had said his name, the intensity of her gaze, and the expensive elegance of her appearance suggested that she existed in a world completely different from his own. But somehow their paths had crossed in a moment of crisis. He fell asleep wondering why a wealthy heiress would react so strongly to meeting a struggling warehouse worker, and whether he would ever understand the connection that seemed to exist between them. The questions would have to wait until morning, but Marcus had learned from 15 years of single parenthood that some answers came in their own time, often in ways that changed everything you thought you knew about your life. Victoria Ashford woke in the private room at Seattle Presbyterian Hospital with the kind of clarity that sometimes follows traumatic experiences. The oxygen therapy had cleared the smoke from her lungs, and though her throat was still raw and her eyes irritated, her mind was functioning with sharp precision. After 15 years of searching, she had finally found Marcus Chen, and the circumstances of their meeting seemed almost impossible to believe. The irony was not lost on her that she had spent millions of dollars hiring private investigators, genealogists, and research specialists to locate a man who lived less than 20 miles from her Magnolia district mansion. Marcus Chen, the warehouse worker who had risked his life to save her, was the same Marcus Chen whose existence had defined her adult life even though they had never met until last night. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Victoria's personal physician and longtime family friend, entered the room carrying test results and wearing the expression of someone who was relieved but not entirely satisfied with her patient's condition. "Your lung function is good, and there's no indication of serious smoke inhalation damage," Dr. Walsh reported. "But I want to keep you for observation for at least another day. You're lucky that man found you when he did." "Dr. Walsh," Victoria said, "I need you to help me contact Marcus Chen immediately. It's extremely important that I speak with him before he disappears back into whatever life he was living before last night." Dr. Walsh frowned, clearly concerned that Victoria might be experiencing some form of trauma-related confusion. "Victoria, you've been through a terrible experience. It's normal to feel intensely grateful to someone who saved your life, but you should probably give yourself time to process what happened before making any major decisions." But Victoria's urgency had nothing to do with rescue-related emotional confusion, and everything to do with information that Dr. Walsh didn't possess. "You don't understand," Victoria insisted. "Marcus Chen isn't just the man who saved me from the fire. He's the man I've been searching for since I was 18 years old. He's Emma's father." The revelation clearly shocked Dr. Walsh, who had been Victoria's physician throughout her 20s and was familiar with the personal history that had shaped her adult decisions. "Are you certain? How can you be sure after all these years?" Victoria had wondered the same thing during the early hours of the morning, questioning whether the trauma of the fire and smoke inhalation might have caused her to imagine connections that didn't exist. But the more she thought about it, the more certain she became that the man who had carried her from the burning mansion was indeed the Marcus Chen she had been seeking. "The physical appearance matches the age progression analysis I had done 3 years ago," Victoria explained. "Asian features, the right height and build, and he confirmed that he lives in Seattle. But more than that, there was something about his manner, the way he spoke, that reminded me of the conversations we had 15 years ago." Dr. Walsh sat down, understanding that Victoria's determination to contact Marcus wasn't the result of rescue-related gratitude, but the culmination of a search that had consumed significant portions of her adult life. "Victoria, even if this man is Emma's father, approaching him could have serious consequences for everyone involved. You need to consider how this might affect your life and his." Victoria had been considering little else since waking up in the hospital. For 15 years, she had imagined various scenarios for how she might eventually contact Marcus Chen, but none of those scenarios had involved being rescued from a burning building. The dramatic nature of their reunion had created circumstances that made a gradual, careful approach impossible. "Emma deserves to know her father," Victoria said, referring to the daughter she had given up for adoption 15 years earlier. "And Marcus deserves to know that he has a daughter who has been wondering about him her entire life." The story that had led to Victoria's long search began during her senior year at the University of Washington, when she had been a different person, with different priorities and no understanding of the responsibilities that would eventually define her adult life. At 18, Victoria had been more interested in rebelling against her family's pharmaceutical fortune than in preparing to inherit it, and her relationship with Marcus had been part of that rebellion. Marcus had been a 23-year-old graduate student in the university's social work program, already demonstrating the kind of dedication to helping others that would later drive him to risk his life for a stranger. They had met in a sociology course where Victoria was enrolled as an undergraduate and Marcus was serving as a teaching assistant, and their connection had been immediate and intense despite the differences in their backgrounds. Victoria came from a family where money solved most problems, and where personal relationships often involved complex calculations about social status and financial advantage. Marcus came from a working-class family where every opportunity had to be earned, and where personal integrity was valued more highly than material success. Their relationship had been a refuge for both of them from the pressures of their respective worlds. When Victoria discovered she was pregnant during the spring semester of her senior year, both she and Marcus had been overwhelmed by the implications of bringing a child into their uncertain circumstances. Victoria was scheduled to begin graduate work in business administration, preparing to eventually take over management of her family's company. Marcus was planning to pursue a career in social work that would be personally fulfilling, but financially challenging. The decision to place their daughter for adoption had been mutual but agonizing, based on their shared belief that they could not provide the stable home environment that a child deserved. Victoria's family had the financial resources to support a child, but not the emotional availability that meaningful parenting required. Marcus had the emotional commitment, but lacked the financial stability that would allow him to be the kind of father he wanted to be. Emma had been adopted by a middle-class family in Portland, Oregon, people who had been carefully screened and who seemed ideally suited to provide the love and stability that Victoria and Marcus couldn't offer. The adoption had been arranged through a private agency that specialized in matching birth parents with adoptive families, and both Victoria and Marcus had signed agreements allowing for limited contact during Emma's childhood if all parties agreed. But shortly after the adoption was finalized, Marcus had disappeared from Victoria's life completely. The forwarding address he had provided had turned out to be temporary, and attempts to contact him through the university had been unsuccessful. Graduate school records showed that he had withdrawn from his program during the summer after Emma's birth, but there was no indication of where he had gone or what his plans were. Victoria had initially assumed that Marcus's disappearance was intentional, perhaps his way of moving on from a relationship and situation that had become too complicated to continue. But as years passed, and she began trying to locate him, she discovered that his disappearance seemed to involve genuine hardship, rather than simply a desire to avoid contact. The private investigators Victoria eventually hired found evidence that Marcus had left graduate school due to a family emergency that had required him to return to California to care for his aging parents. Financial records suggested that he had struggled significantly during his early 20s, working various jobs and moving frequently as he tried to establish some form of stability while dealing with family responsibilities. By the time Victoria was in a position to conduct a serious search for Marcus, nearly 5 years had passed since Emma's birth. The trail had grown cold, and Marcus Chen turned out to be a common enough name that locating a specific individual required extensive investigation and considerable financial resources. Victoria had continued the search throughout her 20s, even as she took on increasing responsibilities in her family's business, and began building the kind of successful career that her parents had always expected. Part of her motivation was the belief that Emma deserved to have information about her birth father if she ever wanted it. But an equally important part was Victoria's own need to understand what had happened to the person who had been so important to her during one of the most significant periods of her life. Now, lying in a hospital bed and trying to process the incredible coincidence of being rescued by the man she had been seeking for 15 years, Victoria understood that fate had provided an opportunity that might never come again. Marcus Chen was no longer a theoretical person whose existence could be confirmed through investigation. He was a real individual who had demonstrated exactly the kind of heroic character that Victoria remembered from their relationship. "Dr. Walsh," Victoria said, "I need you to help me contact the fire department and find out how to reach Marcus Chen. I don't care about the social complications or the potential consequences. After 15 years, I'm not going to let this opportunity disappear." Dr. Walsh recognized the determination in Victoria's voice, the same quality that had driven her to build her family's pharmaceutical company into one of the most successful enterprises in the Pacific Northwest. "What exactly are you planning to say to him?" Victoria had been considering that question since she woke up and realized who her rescuer was. The truth was straightforward but potentially overwhelming for someone who had no idea that his actions 15 years ago had created a daughter he had never met. "I'm going to tell him that the woman he saved from the fire is the same woman who gave birth to his daughter, and that Emma has been hoping to meet him her entire life." The complications of that conversation were obvious to both Victoria and Dr. Walsh. Marcus had demonstrated that he was capable of heroic actions and personal sacrifice, but learning about Emma's existence would fundamentally change his understanding of his own life and responsibilities. There was no way to predict how he would respond to information that had the potential to alter everything about his current circumstances. "Victoria," Dr. Walsh said gently, "you need to consider the possibility that Marcus might not want to be found. He might have reasons for disappearing from your life that are still valid today. Approaching him could create problems for him that he's not prepared to handle." But Victoria had considered that possibility many times over the years. And her encounter with Marcus the previous night had convinced her that his disappearance had not been about avoiding responsibility or ending their relationship by choice. The man who had risked his life to save a stranger was not someone who would have abandoned his own daughter intentionally. "He didn't know," Victoria said with certainty. Whatever happened 15 years ago, Marcus never knew that Emma was looking for him. If he had known, he would have found a way to be part of her life. As Victoria prepared to begin the most important conversation of her adult life, she realized that the fire that had destroyed her Magnolia mansion might have been the catalyst that finally brought her family together. The irony was almost too perfect to believe, but sometimes the most meaningful connections were forged in moments of crisis, when all the careful planning and expensive investigation efforts failed, and fate took control of circumstances that human effort couldn't orchestrate. The phone number that Captain Rodriguez provided to Victoria belonged to Marcus Chen's employer at Northwest Distribution Services, where he had worked the day shift for nearly 3 years. Victoria called the warehouse at 10 in the morning, knowing that Marcus would be in the middle of his workday but understanding that some conversations couldn't wait for convenient timing. "I need to speak with Marcus Chen," Victoria told the receptionist, a woman whose voice suggested she was accustomed to handling calls from supervisors, government agencies, and other official sources. "This is regarding the fire rescue incident that occurred last night." The receptionist transferred Victoria to the warehouse floor, where a supervisor named Dave Martinez answered with the harried tone of someone managing multiple crises simultaneously. "Marcus isn't supposed to take personal calls during his shift," Martinez said, "but I heard about what he did last night. Give me a minute to find him." Victoria waited, listening to the industrial sounds of the warehouse operation and trying to imagine Marcus in that environment. The private investigators' reports had provided basic information about his employment history, but she had never really considered the day-to-day reality of his working life until now. When Marcus came to the phone, his voice was cautious, probably wondering why someone would be calling him at work about the previous night's events. "This is Marcus Chen." "Mr. Chen, this is Victoria Ashford. You saved my life last night, and I need to speak with you about something extremely important. Would it be possible for us to meet this evening?" There was a long pause, and Victoria could hear the warehouse activity continuing in the background. "Ms. Ashford, I'm glad you're okay, but I don't think there's anything we need to discuss. I just did what anyone would have done in that situation." Victoria had expected that Marcus might be reluctant to meet with her, especially if he assumed she wanted to offer some kind of reward or public recognition for his heroic actions. But she also knew that what she had to tell him would change his entire understanding of their connection. "Mr. Chen, I need to tell you something that I can't explain over the phone. It's about something that happened 15 years ago. Something that connects us in a way that has nothing to do with last night's fire." Another pause, longer this time, and Victoria could sense that Marcus was trying to understand what she might be referring to. 15 years ago would place their previous connection during his graduate school years, a period of his life that he had probably not thought about in relation to current events. "I'm not sure what you're talking about," Marcus said finally, "but I really can't leave work to meet with you. I need this job, and taking time off for personal meetings isn't something I can afford to do." The response revealed more about Marcus's current circumstances than he probably intended. He was still living paycheck to paycheck, still in a position where losing even a few hours of work could create financial problems. Victoria realized that her request for a meeting might seem like a luxury that only wealthy people could afford. "Mr. Chen, I understand that you can't lose work time, and I don't want to create any problems for you with your employer. But what I need to discuss with you is important enough that I'm willing to compensate you for any time you might lose. This isn't about gratitude for last night. This is about something that affects both of our lives in ways you don't currently understand." Victoria could hear Marcus discussing something with his supervisor, probably explaining the situation and requesting permission to take a personal call. When he returned to the phone, his voice was more serious, suggesting that he was beginning to understand that Victoria's request involved more than simple post-rescue courtesy. "Ms. Ashford, I can meet with you after my shift ends at 4 o'clock, but I need to be home by 6 to pick up my daughter from after-school care. Whatever you want to discuss, it will have to fit into that time frame." The mention of Marcus's daughter created a moment of profound silence as Victoria processed the implications of what he had just said. Marcus had a daughter, which meant that Emma had a half-sister she had never known about. The family connections that Victoria had been trying to understand for 15 years were apparently even more complex than she had realized. "Your daughter," Victoria said carefully. "How old is she?" "Emma's 12, Marcus replied, and Victoria felt her heart stop beating for what seemed like an eternity. The name was too much of a coincidence to be anything other than evidence that fate had been orchestrating events that human planning could never have arranged. Marcus had named his daughter Emma, the same name that Victoria had chosen for their daughter 15 years earlier. Either there were two Emma Chens in Marcus's life, or the daughter he was planning to pick up from after-school care was the same daughter that Victoria had given birth to. "Mr. Chen," Victoria said, her voice barely steady, "I think your daughter Emma might be someone I know. I think she might be our daughter." The silence that followed was complete, broken only by the industrial sounds of the warehouse operation that continued around Marcus. Victoria could imagine him trying to process what she had just said, trying to make sense of a statement that challenged everything he thought he knew about his current life. "I think we need to meet immediately," Marcus said finally, his voice containing a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been hope. "I'll talk to my supervisor about leaving early. Can you come to the warehouse?" Victoria was already gathering her belongings and preparing to leave the hospital, despite Dr. Walsh's advice to remain for observation. Some conversations were too important to delay for medical convenience, and some revelations required immediate action rather than careful planning. "I'll be there within an hour," Victoria promised, knowing that the drive from the hospital to Marcus's workplace would give her time to prepare for a conversation that would either confirm the most incredible coincidence of her life or reveal that she had been mistaken about connections that had seemed obvious in the emotional aftermath of the fire. As Victoria left the hospital and climbed into the taxi that would take her to Northwest Distribution Services, she realized that the search that had defined 15 years of her life was about to end in a warehouse parking lot in an industrial section of Seattle that she had never visited before. The setting was completely different from any of the scenarios she had imagined, but the importance of the moment was exactly what she had been hoping for since she was 18 years old. Marcus had asked his supervisor for an emergency personal day, explaining that a family situation had arisen that required his immediate attention. Dave Martinez had been understanding, particularly since Marcus's heroic actions the previous night had generated positive publicity for the company, but he had also made clear that taking unscheduled time off was a privilege that Marcus couldn't afford to use frequently. When Victoria's taxi pulled into the warehouse parking lot, Marcus was waiting beside his aging Honda Civic, wearing work clothes that showed evidence of his morning shift and carrying the kind of tension that comes with anticipating life-changing news. Victoria had changed from her hospital gown into clothes that Dr. Walsh had brought from her damaged home, but she still bore the physical evidence of the previous night's trauma in her irritated eyes and raw throat. They looked at each other across the parking lot. Two people whose lives had intersected 15 years earlier in ways that had created a daughter they had both lost touch with, and who had been brought back together by circumstances that seemed too dramatic to be coincidental. Victoria could see in Marcus's expression the same combination of hope and apprehension that she was feeling. "Victoria," Marcus said as she approached, using her first name in a way that suggested he was beginning to remember their previous relationship. "I've been thinking about what you said on the phone, and I have to ask you directly, are you the Victoria from the university? The Victoria I knew during graduate school?" "Yes," Victoria replied simply, seeing in Marcus's face the recognition that confirmed they had indeed found each other after 15 years of separation. "I'm the Victoria who gave birth to Emma Chen in March of 2009. And unless I'm completely mistaken, Emma Chen is the daughter you're planning to pick up from after-school care this afternoon." The moment Marcus heard Victoria confirm that she was indeed the woman from his graduate school years, the warehouse parking lot seemed to fade away, replaced by memories he had buried under 15 years of survival and single parenthood. Victoria Ashford, the brilliant sociology student who had challenged his assumptions about social justice and economic inequality, stood before him as an elegant woman whose expensive clothes and confident bearing spoke of a life he had never imagined she would lead. Marcus remembered Victoria as someone who had questioned the pharmaceutical industry her family dominated, someone who had talked passionately about using her eventual inheritance to fund social programs rather than expand corporate profits. The woman facing him now carried herself with the authority of someone who had learned to navigate boardrooms and manage vast financial resources, but her eyes held the same intensity he remembered from their late-night conversations about changing the world. "Emma," Marcus said quietly, the name carrying 15 years of love, worry, and protective instinct. "You're telling me that my Emma, the daughter I've raised since she was 3 months old, is the same Emma we placed for adoption when she was born?" Victoria nodded, understanding that Marcus was processing information that fundamentally altered his understanding of his own life. "The adoption agency contacted me when Emma was 3 months old. Her adoptive parents had been killed in a car accident, and they needed to find alternative placement. I wanted to take her myself, but I was only 19 and completely unprepared for parenthood. They said the birth father had expressed interest in adoption if the original placement fell through." The memory came flooding back to Marcus with painful clarity. He had been working 2 jobs and trying to finish his graduate degree when the adoption agency called to inform him that Emma's adoptive parents had died and that she needed immediate placement. He had never expected to hear from the agency again after signing the initial adoption papers, but suddenly he was faced with the choice between taking responsibility for a daughter he had never known or allowing her to be placed with another family. "I remember that phone call," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "They told me I had 24 hours to decide whether I wanted to accept legal and financial responsibility for Emma. I had no money, no stable housing, no family support. I was barely keeping myself fed and housed, but I couldn't let her go to strangers when I was her biological father." Victoria felt tears forming as she listened to Marcus describe the circumstances that had led to him raising Emma alone. The private investigators she had hired over the years had never been able to trace the connection between the adopted daughter placed with the Henderson family in Portland and the Emma Chen who had been raised by a single father in Seattle. The change in Emma's surname when Marcus' custody had created a gap in the documentation that had prevented Victoria from discovering the truth. "I've been looking for both of you for 15 years, Victoria admitted. "I hired investigators, contacted adoption agencies, even had genealogists research family trees trying to find any trace of where Emma had ended up. I never knew that the adoptive parents had died, and I never knew that you had taken custody of her." Marcus struggled to process the implications of what Victoria was telling him. For 12 years, he had raised Emma believing that her birth mother had chosen to remain anonymous and had no interest in contact. He had told Emma age-appropriate versions of her adoption story, always emphasizing that her birth parents had made a loving decision to ensure she had the best possible life, but never suggesting that either of them might be looking for her. "Does Emma know about me?" Victoria asked, her voice carrying the weight of 15 years of wondering about the daughter she had given birth to but never had the opportunity to parent. "She knows she's adopted," Marcus replied carefully. "I've always been honest with her about that. but I told her that her birth parents had decided that remaining anonymous was best for everyone. I never wanted her to feel abandoned or unwanted, so I emphasized that adoption was a choice made out of love rather than rejection. Victoria understood that Marcus had been trying to protect Emma from the pain of wondering why her birth parents had given her up, but she also realized that Emma had been growing up without knowing that her birth mother had been actively searching for her. The daughter Victoria had been hoping to find had been living less than 20 miles away, being raised by the same man Victoria had been trying to locate. Marcus. Victoria said, "I need you to understand something about my family situation. My parents died in a plane crash 4 years ago, and I inherited the pharmaceutical company they built. I'm not the same person I was in college. I have resources now that could change Emma's life completely, but more importantly, I have the emotional capacity to be a real mother to her if she's interested in having a relationship with me." The mention of Victoria's inheritance brought Marcus face to face with realities he had been trying not to consider since Victoria's phone call. If Emma's birth mother was now a wealthy businesswoman, there would inevitably be questions about child support, custody arrangements, and the kind of educational and social opportunities that Marcus could never provide on a warehouse worker's salary. "Victoria," Marcus said hesitantly, "I need you to understand something about my situation. I love Emma more than anything in the world, and I've done my best to give her a good life, but I'm not wealthy. We live in a small apartment, I work 3 jobs to pay for her expenses, and I probably can't offer her the kind of advantages that someone with your resources could provide." Victoria heard the defensiveness in Marcus's voice and realized that he was interpreting her mention of her inheritance as a potential threat to his relationship with Emma. She had spent enough time in custody battles involving wealthy families to understand that money often became a weapon used to separate children from parents who loved them but couldn't provide material advantages. "Marcus, I'm not here to take Emma away from you," Victoria said firmly. "You've been her father for 12 years. You've raised her, loved her, and sacrificed for her in ways I never had the opportunity to do. I'm here because I want to be part of her life, not because I want to replace the parent she already has." But even as Victoria spoke the words, both she and Marcus understood that introducing a wealthy birth mother into Emma's life would inevitably create complications that would affect the family dynamic they had both been trying to preserve. Emma would suddenly have access to opportunities and resources that had been completely unavailable to her throughout her childhood, and that disparity would raise questions about fairness, loyalty, and the different definitions of parental love. "What exactly are you proposing?" Marcus asked, trying to approach the situation with the same practical problem-solving skills that had helped him navigate 15 years of single parenthood. Victoria had been considering that question since she woke up in the hospital and realized who Marcus was. She had financial resources that could eliminate Marcus's money worries and provide Emma with educational opportunities that would prepare her for any future she might choose. But she also understood that simply offering money could be insulting to a man who had worked so hard to provide for his daughter independently. "I want to get to know Emma," Victoria said. "I want to be part of her life in whatever way feels natural for all of us. And I want to help with her expenses, not because I think you're not doing a good job, but because I should have been contributing to her support all along." Marcus appreciated Victoria's careful phrasing, but he also recognized that accepting financial help from Emma's birth mother would fundamentally change the independence he had fought so hard to maintain. For 12 years, he had taken pride in providing for Emma through his own work, even when that meant working multiple jobs and sacrificing his own comfort and opportunities. "Victoria, I appreciate what you're offering, but Emma and I have a good life together. It's not luxurious, but it's stable and loving. I'm not sure how introducing a wealthy birth mother into that situation would affect her emotional well-being." Victoria understood Marcus's concerns, but she also knew that Emma deserved to have the opportunity to make her own choices about whether she wanted a relationship with her birth mother. "Marcus, doesn't Emma have the right to know that I've been looking for her? Doesn't she have the right to decide for herself whether she wants me to be part of her life?" The question struck at the heart of Marcus's protective instincts, while also challenging his commitment to making decisions based on Emma's best interests rather than his own fears. For 12 years, he had made choices about Emma's life based on the information and resources available to him. But now circumstances had changed in ways that required him to reconsider what was truly best for his daughter. "She's 12 years old," Marcus said. "She's at an age where she's starting to ask more questions about her adoption and her birth parents. Last month, she asked me if I thought her birth mother ever wondered what happened to her. Victoria felt her heart break at the thought of Emma wondering whether her birth mother cared about her, while Victoria had been spending hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to find her. The separation that had seemed necessary 15 years earlier had created pain for everyone involved, pain that could finally be addressed if they could find a way to bring their fractured family back together. Marcus, I've thought about Emma every day for 15 years. I've wondered what she looks like, what she's interested in, whether she's happy, whether she feels loved. I've imagined conversations with her, pictured what it would be like to be part of her life. Meeting you last night and discovering that you've been raising her is the answer to 15 years of hoping and searching. Marcus could hear the genuine emotion in Victoria's voice, and it reminded him of the woman he had known in college, someone who had cared deeply about family and justice and doing the right thing even when it was difficult. But he also understood that emotional sincerity didn't automatically resolve the practical complications of merging two very different worlds. If we do this, Marcus said, if we tell Emma that you're her birth mother and that you want to be part of her life, there's no going back. Once she knows you exist and that you have resources that could change her life, everything changes for all of us. Victoria nodded, understanding that Marcus was asking her to consider the long-term implications of their decision, rather than just the immediate emotional appeal of family reunion. Marcus, I've been considering those implications for 15 years. I know this won't be simple, and I know there will be complications. But Emma deserves to have both of her birth parents in her life, if that's what she wants. They stood in the warehouse parking lot as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the industrial landscape, two people whose lives had intersected 15 years earlier in ways that had created a daughter they had both loved, but had been forced to parent separately. The fire that had brought them back together had created an opportunity to address the separation that had defined their adult lives, but it had also raised questions about family, responsibility, and the different ways that love could be expressed. How do we tell her? Marcus asked, accepting that Victoria was right about Emma's right to know about her birth mother's existence and desire for contact. Together, Victoria replied. We tell her together, as her parents, and we let her decide how she wants to handle the situation. Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and terror at the prospect of introducing Emma to her birth mother. For 12 years, he had been Emma's only parent, making all the decisions about her education, healthcare, and social development. Suddenly, he would be sharing that responsibility with someone who had different resources, different perspectives, and different ideas about what was best for Emma's future. There's something else you need to know, Marcus said, realizing that honesty about their current circumstances was essential if they were going to build a relationship based on trust. Emma and I are very close. She's been my partner in navigating financial challenges, and she's more mature than most 12-year-olds because she's had to be. She knows we don't have much money, and she's proud of how hard we work to take care of each other. Victoria understood that Marcus was preparing her for the possibility that Emma might be suspicious of a wealthy birth mother who suddenly appeared in their lives offering financial assistance. Children who had experienced economic insecurity often developed strong protective instincts about maintaining their family's independence. Marcus, I don't want to disrupt the relationship you've built with Emma. I want to add to it, not replace it. If she's happy with the life you've created together, then my role should be to support that, rather than to change it. But both Victoria and Marcus understood that simply adding a wealthy birth mother to Emma's life would inevitably change the family dynamic in ways that would require careful navigation. Emma would suddenly have access to resources and opportunities that had been unavailable throughout her childhood, and that change would raise questions about fairness, gratitude, and the different definitions of parental success. We should probably start slowly, Marcus suggested. Maybe you could meet Emma as a friend of mine first, and we could see how she responds to you before we explain the family connection. Victoria appreciated Marcus's cautious approach, but she also knew that Emma was intelligent enough to sense if the adults in her life were keeping important secrets. Marcus, I think Emma deserves more honesty than that. If we're going to build a relationship based on trust, we should start with the truth about who I am and why I want to be part of her life. As they prepared to drive to Emma's after-school program, both Victoria and Marcus understood that they were about to initiate conversations that would define the rest of their lives. The daughter they had created together 15 years earlier was about to learn that the family she thought she understood was actually much more complex, and much more connected than she had ever imagined. Victoria followed Marcus's Honda Civic through Seattle traffic toward the community center where Emma spent her afternoons, her own car. A luxury sedan that represented the financial success she had achieved but had never been able to share with her daughter. As they drove through neighborhoods that became increasingly working class, Victoria realized that Emma had grown up in a world completely different from the one Victoria could have provided. The Rainier Community Center was a modest building that served families who needed affordable after-school care, homework assistance, and recreational activities for their children. Victoria had driven past similar centers countless times without really considering the families who depended on their services, but now she understood that these programs had been essential to Marcus's ability to work multiple jobs while ensuring that Emma was safe and supervised. When they arrived at the community center, Marcus turned to Victoria with an expression that contained 15 years of protective parenting and the uncertainty of sharing that responsibility with someone else. Emma is going to be curious about why I'm early and why I brought someone with me. Are you ready for this conversation? Victoria took a deep breath, understanding that the next few minutes would determine whether her 15-year search would result in the family reunion she had been hoping for or create new complications that could affect Emma's emotional well-being. I'm ready. They entered the community center together, and Victoria was immediately struck by the sense of community and mutual support that characterized the environment. Children of various ages were engaged in homework, recreational activities, and social interaction under the supervision of staff members who clearly cared about their well-being and development. Emma Chen was sitting at a table working on mathematics homework, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and her clothes reflecting the kind of careful shopping that prioritized durability over fashion. When she looked up and saw her father approaching with an unknown woman, her expression showed the kind of cautious curiosity that Victoria remembered from her own childhood. At 12, Emma had inherited physical characteristics from both of her birth parents, combining Marcus's Asian features with Victoria's height and bone structure in ways that created a unique beauty that suggested the strong, confident woman she would eventually become. But more than her physical appearance, Emma radiated the kind of intelligence and emotional maturity that came from being raised by a devoted single parent who had taught her to think independently and value personal integrity over material success. "Hi, Dad," Emma said, gathering her homework materials and preparing to leave with Marcus as she did every afternoon. "You're early today. Is everything okay?" Marcus felt the familiar surge of protective love that had defined his relationship with Emma since she was an infant, but now that love was combined with the uncertainty of introducing her to someone who could fundamentally change their family dynamic. "Emma, I want you to meet someone very important. This is Victoria Ashford." Emma extended her hand politely, displaying the kind of social grace that Marcus had taught her despite their limited exposure to formal social situations. "Nice to meet you, Ms. Ashford. Are you a friend of my dad's?" Victoria shook Emma's hand, feeling the physical connection to her daughter for the first time since Emma was 3 days old. "It's wonderful to meet you, Emma. I am a friend of your father's, but I'm also someone who has been hoping to meet you for a very long time." Emma's expression became more curious, clearly sensing that this meeting involved more than casual adult friendship. "Why have you been hoping to meet me?" Marcus and Victoria exchanged glances, understanding that Emma's direct question required an honest answer that would either build trust or create confusion and potential resentment. Victoria had prepared for this moment for 15 years, but actually facing her intelligent, mature daughter required more courage than she had anticipated. "Emma," Victoria said carefully, 15 years ago, your father and I knew each other in college. We cared about each other very much, and together we had a baby daughter. That baby was you." Emma's eyes widened as she processed the information, looking back and forth between Marcus and Victoria as she began to understand the implications of what she was being told. "You're my birth mother?" "Yes," Victoria replied simply, allowing Emma to control the pace of their conversation rather than overwhelming her with information or emotion. Emma was quiet for a long moment, studying Victoria's face with the kind of careful observation that suggested she was comparing physical features and trying to identify family resemblances. "Dad told me that my birth parents had decided it was better if they didn't stay in contact with me. He said you thought it would be easier for everyone if I didn't know who you were." Victoria felt a stab of pain at Emma's words, understanding that her daughter had grown up believing that her birth parents had chosen not to maintain contact rather than knowing that Victoria had been actively searching for her. "Emma, that's not exactly what happened. Your father and I lost touch with each other after you were born, and I've been trying to find both of you ever since." Emma looked at Marcus with an expression that demanded complete honesty about their family history. "Dad, is that true? Has she really been looking for us?" Marcus nodded, understanding that Emma deserved to know the full truth about her birth mother's efforts to find her. "Emma, I only learned about Victoria's search yesterday when she told me. I never knew she was trying to locate us." "Why didn't you try to find her?" Emma asked Marcus, displaying the kind of logical thinking that often characterized children who had been raised to think independently. The question addressed one of Marcus's deepest regrets about the choices he had made during Emma's early childhood. "Emma, when you were little, I was working so hard just to keep us housed and fed that I didn't have the resources to hire investigators or conduct searches. By the time I was financially stable enough to consider looking for Victoria, I assumed she had moved on with her life and wouldn't want contact." Emma processed this information with the kind of emotional intelligence that impressed Victoria and confirmed that Marcus had done an exceptional job raising her despite the financial constraints they had faced. "Ms. Ashford, why were you looking for us? Did you want to be my mom?" The directness of Emma's question cut straight to the heart of Victoria's motivations and forced her to articulate feelings she had been carrying for 15 years. "Emma, I never stopped thinking about you or wondering what kind of person you were becoming. I placed you for adoption because I wanted you to have a better life than I could provide when I was 19, but I always hoped that someday I would be able to know you and be part of your life if you wanted that." Emma studied Victoria's face, clearly trying to determine whether her birth mother's explanation was sincere, and whether this unexpected reunion was something she should be excited about or cautious regarding. "What kind of life do you have now? Are you married? Do you have other children?" "I'm not married, and I don't have other children," Victoria replied. "I focused on building a career and managing my family's business, but I always considered you my daughter, even though I wasn't able to raise you." "What kind of business?" Emma asked, displaying the kind of practical curiosity that Marcus had encouraged throughout her childhood. Victoria hesitated, understanding that mentioning her pharmaceutical fortune might create complications in her relationship with Emma before they had established trust and mutual understanding. "My family owns a company that develops medications. It's been successful enough that I have resources I could share with you and your father if you're interested." Emma looked at Marcus, clearly seeking his guidance about how to respond to Victoria's mention of financial resources. "Dad, what do you think about all this?" Marcus felt the weight of parental responsibility that had defined 12 years of making decisions, based on what he believed was best for Emma's emotional and practical well-being. "Emma, I think this is your decision to make. Victoria is your birth mother, and if you want to get to know her and have her be part of your life, I support that completely." "But what about the money she mentioned?" Emma asked with the kind of directness that sometimes embarrassed Marcus but that he had always admired in his daughter. Victoria appreciated Emma's practical approach to their reunion and understood that financial considerations would inevitably be part of any ongoing relationship they might develop. "Emma, I have enough money to help with your education, your activities, and anything else you might need or want, but that's not why I wanted to find you. I wanted to find you because you're my daughter and I love you." Emma was quiet for several minutes, processing information that fundamentally changed her understanding of her family structure and her future possibilities. Victoria and Marcus waited patiently, understanding that Emma needed time to consider the implications of what she was learning. "Can I ask you something?" Emma finally said to Victoria. "You can ask me anything," Victoria replied. "If you have a lot of money, why didn't you just keep me when I was born instead of placing me for adoption?" The question addressed the core issue that had defined Victoria's adult life and forced her to explain decisions she had made when she was not much older than Emma was now. "Emma, when you were born, I was only 19 years old. I had never held a job, never lived independently, never been responsible for taking care of anyone other than myself. I thought you deserved parents who knew how to be parents, not someone who was still learning how to be an adult. But Dad was only 23, and he figured out how to take care of me," Emma pointed out with the kind of logical thinking that impressed both of her birth parents. Victoria felt the truth of Emma's observation and realized that her daughter was old enough to understand that choices made out of fear were not always the choices that led to the best outcomes. You're absolutely right, Emma. Your father was braver than I was. Hey, you were lucky to have him as your parent. Emma looked at Marcus with obvious affection and pride, confirming that their relationship was built on mutual respect and genuine love rather than simply obligation or circumstance. Dad's the best father anyone could have. He works really hard to take care of me, and he's taught me everything important I know. Victoria felt both happiness that Emma had been so well loved and a sharp sense of loss for all the moments of parenting she had missed. I can see that your father has done an amazing job raising you. I'm not here to replace him or to change the relationship you have with him. I'm here because I want to add to your family, not take anything away from it. So you want to be like a second mom? Emma asked, trying to understand how Victoria's role would be defined within their existing family structure. I want to be whatever feels right to you, Victoria replied. If you want me to be a friend, I'll be a friend. If you want me to be involved in your life as a parent, I'd be honored to do that. You get to decide what feels comfortable and what makes you happy. Emma considered Victoria's offer with the kind of careful thought that suggested she understood the significance of the decision she was being asked to make. Can I think about it for a while? This is a lot to process all at once. Of course, Victoria said, impressed by Emma's maturity and emotional intelligence. There's no pressure to make any decisions immediately. I've been hoping to meet you for 15 years, so I'm willing to wait as long as you need to figure out what feels right. As they prepared to leave the community center, Emma walking between her birth parents for the first time since she was 3 days old, all three of them understood that their lives had been fundamentally changed by Victoria's revelation. The family that Marcus and Emma had built together would now expand to include someone with different resources, different perspectives, and different ideas about what Emma's future could look like. Ms. Ashford, Emma said as they reached the parking lot, would you like to come have dinner with us tonight? Dad makes really good spaghetti, and I could show you our apartment. Victoria felt tears forming at Emma's generous invitation, understanding that her daughter was offering to share the life she had built with Marcus, despite having just learned about Victoria's existence. I would love that more than anything in the world. As they drove through Seattle toward Marcus and Emma's apartment, Victoria following behind their Honda Civic in her luxury sedan, she realized that the family reunion she had been imagining for 15 years was actually happening in ways more natural and more meaningful than any scenario she had envisioned. Emma's maturity, Marcus's obvious love for his daughter, and the trust they were willing to extend to Victoria suggested that their fractured family might actually be able to heal in ways that honored both their shared past and their individual futures. The small apartment that Marcus and Emma called home occupied the second floor of a converted house in the Beacon Hill neighborhood, where working families stretched their paychecks to maintain dignity in a city increasingly designed for the wealthy. As Victoria climbed the narrow staircase behind Marcus and Emma, she noticed the careful maintenance that spoke of pride despite limited resources. The walls were freshly painted, the carpets were clean though worn, and family photographs lined the hallway with the kind of intentional placement that transformed a rental space into a genuine home. Emma unlocked the apartment door with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been managing household responsibilities since childhood, immediately hanging her backpack on a designated hook and sorting her homework materials with the kind of organization that impressed Victoria. The living space was compact but thoughtfully arranged, with furniture that had clearly been chosen for durability rather than style, yet the overall effect was warm and welcoming in ways that Victoria's expensive Magnolia mansion had never achieved. "Welcome to our home," Marcus said, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and self-consciousness as he watched Victoria take in their modest surroundings. "It's not much, but it's ours." Victoria understood that Marcus was giving her an opportunity to judge their lifestyle and find it lacking, but what she saw instead was evidence of the kind of loving partnership that she had never experienced in her own childhood. Family photographs covered the refrigerator, artwork that Emma had created decorated the walls, and books filled every available shelf space, suggesting intellectual curiosity and educational priorities that transcended financial limitations. "It's beautiful," Victoria said sincerely, noting the way Emma had arranged her science fair ribbons on a small bookshelf, and how Marcus had framed her school photographs with the same care that wealthy families might display expensive artwork. "I can see how much love lives here." Emma beamed at Victoria's appreciation of their home, clearly pleased that her birth mother understood the difference between financial wealth and emotional richness. "Dad says that family isn't about having expensive things. It's about taking care of each other and making each other feel important." The wisdom in Emma's statement struck Victoria powerfully, forcing her to confront the reality that her daughter had received lessons about love and family from Marcus that Victoria's own privileged childhood had never provided. Her parents had expressed affection through expensive gifts and exclusive opportunities, but Emma had learned about unconditional love through daily acts of sacrifice and mutual support. Marcus began preparing dinner with the efficient movements of someone who had mastered the art of creating nutritious meals on a tight budget, while Emma set the small dining table, with care that transformed their simple dinnerware into an elegant presentation. Victoria offered to help, but both father and daughter gently insisted that she was their guest and should simply enjoy watching their established dinner routine. "Dad taught me to cook when I was 8, Emma explained as she arranged cloth napkins that had been carefully ironed despite their age. "He said cooking was one of the most important life skills anyone could learn, because it means you can always take care of yourself and other people no matter what happens." Victoria watched Marcus season the pasta sauce with herbs he had grown in small pots on their kitchen windowsill, noting the way he included Emma in every decision and how she participated in their meal preparation with genuine enthusiasm rather than obligation. Their partnership was built on mutual respect and shared responsibility, creating the kind of family dynamic that Victoria had read about in parenting books but had never actually observed. "Emma, would you mind showing Victoria your room while I finish dinner?" Marcus suggested, giving his daughter an opportunity to share her personal space with her birth mother while also allowing Victoria to understand more about Emma's individual interests and personality. Emma's bedroom was small but perfectly organized, with a desk positioned to catch natural light from the single window and walls covered with academic achievements, artistic projects, and photographs of school friends. Her bookshelf contained an impressive collection of science fiction novels, biography collections, and mathematics workbooks that suggested intellectual interests far beyond typical 12-year-old entertainment. "I want to be a biomedical engineer," Emma explained, showing Victoria a detailed notebook where she had been researching university programs and career requirements. "Dad says if I work hard in school and get good grades, scholarships will make college possible, even though we don't have money saved for tuition." Victoria felt her heart constrict as she realized that Emma was already limiting her dreams based on financial constraints, planning her educational future around scholarship availability rather than simply pursuing her interests without concern for cost. The daughter Victoria had been searching for was brilliant, motivated, and academically gifted, but she was also already learning to compromise her aspirations based on economic realities. "Emma," Victoria said carefully, "what if money wasn't a factor in your educational planning? What would you want to study if you could attend any university and pursue any program that interested you?" Emma's eyes lit up with excitement as she began describing research programs at Stanford and MIT that she had read about but had never seriously considered because of their cost. "There's this incredible biomedical engineering program at Johns Hopkins where they're developing artificial organs using 3D printing technology. And MIT has a program where undergraduate students can work directly with professors on cancer research. But those schools cost more than Dad makes in 3 years, so I focus on state universities with good programs and scholarship opportunities." Victoria listened to Emma describe her academic dreams with the kind of passionate intelligence that reminded her of her own college years, when she had believed that education and hard work could solve any problem and create any opportunity. But Emma's dreams were being shaped by financial constraints that Victoria could eliminate with a single phone call to her financial advisor. "Emma, what if I told you that I could make sure money never limits your educational choices? What if you could apply to any university that interests you without worrying about tuition or expenses?" Emma paused, clearly trying to process the implications of Victoria's offer. "You mean you would pay for my college?" "I mean, I would ensure that your educational future is limited only by your interests and abilities, not by financial constraints," Victoria replied, understanding that her daughter deserved to dream without the limitations that had shaped her entire childhood. But instead of the excitement Victoria had expected, Emma's expression became thoughtful and slightly troubled. "What about Dad? He's been saving money for my college fund since I was little. He works extra shifts on weekends and drives for a delivery service at night just to put money aside for my education. If you pay for everything, what happens to all the sacrifices he's made?" The question revealed the complexity of introducing financial assistance into a family that had built their identity around mutual sacrifice and shared effort. Emma understood that accepting Victoria's resources might diminish the value of Marcus's years of work and planning, potentially making him feel like his contributions were no longer necessary or appreciated. Victoria realized that her offer, while well-intentioned, could fundamentally alter the parent-child relationship that Marcus and Emma had built around working together towards shared goals. Emma, your father's sacrifices aren't about the money he's saved. They're about the love he's shown you and the lessons he's taught you about working hard for things that matter. Nothing I could contribute would ever diminish the importance of what he's given you. But if you pay for my college, does that mean Dad didn't need to work so hard all these years? Emma asked with the kind of logical thinking that impressed Victoria but also highlighted the emotional complexity of their situation. Victoria sat on Emma's carefully made bed, understanding that her daughter was grappling with questions about family loyalty, gratitude, and the different ways that parents express love for their children. Emma, your father worked hard because he loves you and wanted to give you the best future possible. That would be true whether I was part of your life or not. My ability to help with expenses doesn't change the fact that he's been an amazing father who has already given you the most important things any parent can provide. Emma considered Victoria's explanation while straightening books on her desk, a nervous habit that suggested she was processing information that challenged her understanding of family dynamics and financial responsibility. If you become part of our family, will everything change? Will we move to a bigger apartment? Will Dad not have to work so many jobs? The questions addressed Victoria's own concerns about how her financial resources might affect the family balance that Marcus and Emma had created. She wanted to improve their quality of life and expand Emma's opportunities, but she also recognized that dramatic changes could disrupt the partnership and mutual dependence that had made their relationship so strong. Emma, I don't want to change anything about your relationship with your father or the life you've built together unless those changes would make you both happier, Victoria said. If you're comfortable with me being part of your family, then we'll figure out together how that works, in ways that feel right to everyone. Marcus called from the kitchen that dinner was ready, and Emma led Victoria back to the dining room where the small table had been transformed into an elegant presentation despite the modesty of their resources. The pasta sauce filled the apartment with the kind of rich, comforting aroma that spoke of time and care in preparation, and Marcus had opened a bottle of sparkling cider that elevated their meal into a celebration. This smells incredible, Victoria said as Marcus served generous portions of spaghetti with the kind of pride that came from mastering the art of creating memorable meals from simple ingredients. Dad's spaghetti sauce is famous in our building, Emma announced. Mrs. Rodriguez upstairs always knows when he's cooking because the whole hallway smells amazing, and sometimes he makes extra to share with neighbors who are having tough weeks. Victoria learned that Marcus had developed relationships throughout their apartment building, often helping elderly neighbors with grocery shopping or maintenance tasks, and that Emma regularly tutored younger children with their homework. Their small apartment was the center of a community network built on mutual support and shared resources, creating the kind of social connections that Victoria's wealth had never provided. As they shared dinner, Victoria watched the easy conversation between Marcus and Emma, noting how they discussed current events, school projects, and neighborhood news with the kind of intellectual equality that treated Emma as a mature individual, rather than a child to be managed. Their dinner conversation covered Emma's science fair project, Marcus's observations about economic inequality from his warehouse work, and Emma's opinions about local political issues that affected their community. Emma's been following the city council debates about affordable housing, Marcus explained to Victoria. She's been reading the proposals and attending public meetings because she wants to understand how policy decisions affect families like ours. Victoria was impressed by Emma's civic engagement and political awareness, qualities that had been encouraged by Marcus despite their own financial struggles. Emma, what conclusions have you drawn from attending those meetings? I've learned that most of the people making decisions about affordable housing have never lived in affordable housing, Emma replied with a kind of direct observation that demonstrated her ability to think critically about complex social issues. They talk about helping families like ours, but they don't really understand what our lives are like or what kinds of help would actually be useful. The insight revealed Emma's sophisticated understanding of class differences and political representation, knowledge that had been gained through direct experience rather than academic study. Victoria realized that her daughter had received an education about social justice and economic inequality that complemented her academic achievements and prepared her to think thoughtfully about her place in the world. What kind of help do you think would be most useful for families in your situation? Victoria asked, genuinely curious about Emma's perspective on issues that Victoria had primarily understood through charitable giving and policy research. Emma considered the question while twirling pasta around her fork, clearly organizing her thoughts before responding. I think the most important thing would be stable housing costs, so families don't have to choose between paying rent and paying for other necessities. And better access to educational resources, not just financial aid for college, but things like computers and internet access and tutoring programs that help kids succeed in school. Victoria noted that Emma's suggestions focused on systemic changes rather than individual charity, suggesting that she understood the difference between addressing symptoms and addressing root causes of economic inequality. Those are really thoughtful observations, Emma. Have you considered that you might be interested in policy work or public service as part of your future career? Actually, yes, Emma replied with enthusiasm. I want to develop medical technology that can help people, but I also want to make sure that new treatments are accessible to families who can't afford expensive health care. I think understanding policy and economics is just as important as understanding science if you want to actually help people. Marcus listened to Emma articulate her goals with obvious pride, clearly pleased that his daughter had developed both academic ambition and social consciousness despite the financial constraints that had shaped their lives. Emma's been thinking about these issues since she was little. She sees how hard people in our community work just to get by, and she wants her career to address some of those inequalities. Victoria felt simultaneously proud of her daughter's compassion and guilty about the privilege that had allowed her to contribute to social causes through financial donations rather than direct service or personal sacrifice. Emma had developed a sophisticated understanding of social justice through lived experience, while Victoria had learned about inequality from a position of wealth and comfort. Emma, your perspective on these issues is really valuable, Victoria said. I think you could make tremendous contributions to policy discussions because you understand both the scientific aspects of healthcare and the economic realities that affect access to treatment. As dinner continued, Victoria found herself learning not just about Emma's individual personality and interests, but about the family culture that Marcus had created around intellectual curiosity, social responsibility, and mutual support. Their conversations moved easily between academic topics and personal experiences, creating the kind of dinner-table education that prepared Emma to think critically about complex issues. Dad always says that being smart isn't just about getting good grades, Emma explained. It's about understanding how the world works and figuring out how to make it better for people who don't have all the advantages that other people have. The philosophy that had guided Emma's education impressed Victoria and confirmed that Marcus had been not just a loving father, but a thoughtful educator who had prepared his daughter to use her intelligence for meaningful purposes. Emma's academic achievements were complemented by emotional intelligence and social awareness that would serve her well regardless of what career path she eventually chose. After dinner, Emma insisted on clearing the table and washing dishes while Marcus and Victoria continued their conversation in the living room. Victoria could hear Emma humming while she cleaned the kitchen, clearly comfortable with household responsibilities and genuinely cheerful about contributing to their family's daily operations. Marcus, Victoria said quietly, you've done an incredible job raising Emma. She's not just academically gifted, she's emotionally mature and socially conscious in ways that most adults never develop. Marcus felt the validation that came from having his parenting efforts recognized by someone whose opinion mattered to him, but he also understood that Victoria's praise carried additional weight because of her own educational background and professional success. Emma's made it easy to be a good father because she's such a remarkable person, but I also know that she's missed out on opportunities that other kids have had because of our financial situation. Victoria recognized that Marcus was acknowledging the limitations their economic circumstances had created, while also expressing confidence in the foundation he had provided for Emma's future development. Marcus, Emma has had opportunities that money can't buy. She's learned about resilience, community, and social responsibility through direct experience. Those are lessons that will serve her well no matter what path her life takes. But Victoria also understood that Emma's intellectual gifts and academic potential deserved to be supported with resources that would allow her to pursue her interests without financial constraints. Marcus, I want to contribute to Emma's education and opportunities, not because I think you haven't provided enough, but because I want to add to what you've already given her. Marcus appreciated Victoria's careful phrasing. But he also knew that accepting significant financial assistance would change the family dynamic that had been built around shared effort and mutual sacrifice. Victoria, I'm grateful for your offer, and I know it would expand Emma's opportunities in ways I could never provide alone. But I need to understand how we navigate the emotional aspects of suddenly having access to resources that have been unavailable throughout Emma's childhood. The question addressed the complexity of introducing wealth into a family that had built their identity around working together to overcome financial challenges. Emma had learned valuable lessons about perseverance and gratitude through experiencing limitations, and suddenly removing those limitations might affect her character development in unexpected ways. Marcus, I think the key is making sure that any changes we make honor the values you've taught Emma rather than replacing them, Victoria suggested. Emma understands the importance of hard work and social responsibility. Access to resources should enhance those qualities rather than diminish them. As Emma finished in the kitchen and joined them in the living room, carrying 3 cups of tea she had prepared with the same care she brought to all her household contributions, Victoria realized that her daughter had been shaped by experiences that had prepared her to handle both adversity and opportunity with equal grace. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," Emma said to Victoria as she served the tea, "about being able to pay for my education and not having to worry about money." Victoria waited patiently for Emma to articulate her thoughts, understanding that her daughter needed to process the implications of financial assistance before deciding how she felt about accepting it. "I appreciate that you want to help," Emma continued, "but I also want to make sure that if you become part of our family, it's because you want to be with Dad and me, not because you want to fix our money problems." The insight revealed Emma's emotional intelligence and her understanding that family relationships built around financial assistance might be different from relationships built around genuine affection and mutual respect. "Emma, I want to be part of your family because I love you and because I've been hoping to know you for 15 years. The financial help I could provide would be a way of expressing that love, not the reason for it." Emma considered Victoria's explanation while sipping her tea, clearly weighing the sincerity of Victoria's motivations against the dramatic changes that accepting financial assistance would bring to their lives. "If you help with my college expenses, I want to earn part of the money myself. I want to contribute something, even if it's not as much as what you contribute." The request demonstrated Emma's desire to maintain personal agency and self-respect, even while accepting help that would transform her opportunities. Victoria understood that Emma's condition wasn't about pride or stubbornness, but about preserving the sense of personal accomplishment that had been central to her identity throughout her childhood. "Emma, I think that's a wonderful approach," Victoria agreed. "Working for part of your education expenses will make your achievements feel like they belong to you rather than to someone else's generosity." As the evening drew to a close, all 3 of them understood that their family reunion had exceeded even Victoria's most optimistic expectations. Emma had responded to meeting her birth mother with maturity and openness. Marcus had demonstrated his commitment to putting Emma's well-being above his own concerns, and Victoria had discovered that her 15-year search had led her to a daughter and a family situation that was far more meaningful than anything she had imagined. "Victoria," Emma said as they prepared to say goodnight, "would you like to come to my science fair next week? I'm presenting my project on sustainable energy solutions, and it would mean a lot to me if you were there." Victoria felt tears forming at Emma's invitation, understanding that her daughter was offering to include her in the academic achievements and school community that had been central to her childhood. "Emma, I would be honored to attend your science fair. Thank you for inviting me." As Victoria prepared to leave their apartment and return to her hotel, she realized that the family she had been seeking for 15 years was not just Emma, but the partnership that Marcus and Emma had created together. Her role would be to add to their family rather than to change it, supporting their values and goals while providing resources that would expand their opportunities. The fire that had brought them together had created the possibility for healing separations that had affected all of their lives for 15 years. But more than that, it had revealed that sometimes the most meaningful families are created not through shared genetics, but through shared commitment to love, support, and bring out the best in each other. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.